This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Frida, today, this is going to be an interesting one for me, mainly because I'm actually fairly familiar with what we're talking about. These are the seaplanes that go to Isle Royale in Lake Superior. Myself, as someone that grew up in the Keweenaw Peninsula, you're familiar with the Ranger 3 getting there and other vessels, but the seaplanes are a whole other thing, and this is going to be real interesting. Tell me about a little bit who we've got lined up.
Well, let's just take a second to realize that while Isle Royale is the national park in Michigan, it is one of the most difficult to get there because you've either got to go by air or by water. You can't drive there, and you could take your own boat, but you better be a pretty good captain because where you're traveling is a pretty good distance out there. It's not right next door. I like to say when I'm at the top of Brockway Mountain, I might be able to see it sometimes, but that really doesn't happen. It is when I've been in the plane with Tomas, who's with us today on the podcast, that I have had a chance when I lifted off at the canal, and pretty soon you get to see Isle Royale out there, the gem of Lake Superior. And Tomás Sowles knows it better than anybody because he's the chief pilot at the Isle Royale Seaplanes.
Well, Tomás, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you on today.
Thank you for having me, Frida, and Walt. Appreciate it.
So let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, you are the chief pilot with Isle Royale Seaplanes. This is a seaplane that takes off that gets visitors to Isle Royale National Park from the Houghton area. And tell us a little bit about this, what you do and how you ended up here and what really kind of drove you or flew you to land in this gig.
Well, I started with Isle Royale Seaplanes at the very end of 2015. My first summer up here was actually in 2016, and I have been flying out to Isle Royale every summer since. We started with 1 aircraft, and we've grown. This summer now we have 4 aircraft and 5 pilots on staff, including myself.
Well, I know you, Tomás. You are not old enough. When I think back about 2015, and I think that might have been the year that I actually flew with you, or around about that time. How in the world did you land as a pilot so early on in your career?
My father is a pilot. My grandfather was a pilot in World War II. Both of them flew seaplanes, and so flying a seaplane was something that I always knew was something I wanted to do, that I was going to do. I didn't know necessarily that I was going to be doing it as a job professionally until it was time to start thinking about what I needed to do professionally to support myself. So around college, or in high school, started to decide that I was going to pursue aviation as a profession, and ended up going to college for that. And then it was after the most of the colleges train you up for airline flying, and that was what I intended to do. And it wasn't until after college that I was able to seize an opportunity in Maine, which is where I grew up, to fly smaller aircraft in environments similar to like what we're flying to. I was flying to islands off the coast of Maine. The company did have a seaplane, and I was exposed to that, but it wasn't the primary focus of the company. So the seaplane quickly caught my eye, and definitely wanted to continue that, and that's where I am here, continuing that.
As a pilot, what is it about seaplanes?
Well, I would say there's a romantic side to it, and it has to do with really the start of aviation. Aviation started with a seaplane. There weren't really established runways, and so seaplanes were one of the primary methods that aviation was able to continue. Think of the Pan Am, or the early days of Pan Am, as they were flying around the world in these very large seaplanes for transportation. But seaplanes really evolved in my opinion, up in Alaska. That's where they continued on after runways were built. But up in Alaska and Canada, they continued on where roads still weren't built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And still to this day, our seaplanes are still very relevant up there.
So I have to ask you this then, when you talk about that, when we look at this region of what we're talking about, the Keweenaw Peninsula, the Upper Peninsula, that area, and then the Big Lake, and then Isle Royale, and its own geographical challenges, is that one of the things about doing it in this region that makes it interesting for you?
Yeah, anytime you can find somewhere where a seaplane is relevant, it is very interesting. And it feels right, because you're using something that was built, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and it's still relevant today. So there's a nostalgia, a romantic side to it, and it's really cool to continue using it to this day, and everyone's really excited about it.
I love that. I love that was where, when you think about it, because there weren't any runways, but Let's just talk for a second. I mean, Tomas, the runway you have, Lord have mercy. I have a sticker on my kayak, and it says Lake Superior's the boss. I cannot imagine. Oh, okay. And I've taken off with you in the canal, so you're a little bit, protected there, but landing on Lake Superior? Oh, man.
Yeah, we do not land on Lake Superior as a policy. You never know what you can get. Even looking at it from above, from the altitude that we fly at, you wouldn't necessarily even appreciate what the conditions were from that height. So, yeah, I mean, there certainly are many days where you could land out there and have a picnic, go water skiing or something. But as we all know, there are many days where that's not the case.
What are some of the challenges then that you encounter by flying over that body of water?
I would say the fog is the main challenge. The fog, because Lake Superior is such a dramatically cold body of water. I mean, even colder than some of the ocean, or most of the oceans out there. It develops fog. I don't want to say all the time because it doesn't, but it develops it so much of the time, and it develops it in very localized areas, oftentimes widespread. It's challenging to deal with. It's beautiful to look at. My favorite days are when we can fly to the island and it doesn't affect us, but yet we're still able to see it and look at it and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Tomás Sowles, who is chief pilot with Isle Royale Seaplanes today here on the Lake Superior podcast. Tell us a little bit about the aircraft that you use. Tell us about it, describe it, and why this is the aircraft you do use.
Well, the aircraft we started with is a Cessna 206 model. We currently still use that aircraft. We also have expanded to using the de Havilland Beaver, the DHC-2 model aircraft. It was built in the 50s, and it was Canadian built. And this aircraft is, I think, the one that many people look at and see the nostalgia of seaplane flying, because it has a very retro design from having been built in the 50s. There's lots of curves, there's lots of angles, but it's, I don't know if it's a beautiful aircraft, but everyone is really excited to look at it. And I myself think it's a very good looking aircraft, and it evokes a lot of emotion from that. The aircraft is, since it was built in the 50s and it's still flying today, it's a very relevant aircraft. Despite its age, it is very reliable. The engine design has been very reliable despite how old it is. So we can't say it's very efficient because of its age, but it is very reliable, which is great. And the aircraft is impressive in what it's able to do. Much like a lot of things, it can't do everything really well, but it does. It takes 7 people out of the water, which is a big job in itself, and takes them to a destination a short ways away. And that in itself is impressive. It's one downside maybe that you could look at is that it's very slow. It's of all the aircraft out there, it's going to be one of the slowest.
So how long?
Seaplanes are never really fast. But.
Yeah. So how long would that flight be then? For example, with this aircraft you're talking about, and then perhaps on average with some of the other aircrafts, how long can someone in good conditions and everything being proper, about how long do these flights take?
So 45 minutes is the flight time for the de Havilland Beaver. Our Cessna 206 model might do it in like 7 or 8 minutes quicker than that, maybe 36, 37 minutes or so. That's the flight time, the point at which you come off the water and touch down. And there are other aircraft that are going to fly faster, especially without floats, but they won't be able to land on the water until you start getting into bigger aircraft with bigger engines. You're really not going to be able to get going a whole lot much faster.
Tomas, when you were saying you don't land on Lake Superior, I'd just like to clarify that for the folks, because you're landing basically in Tobin Harbor when you land at Rock Island?
That's correct. So Tobin Harbor is the body of water of Tobin Harbor is technically Lake Superior. So yeah, I may have misspoke there. We don't land in the open water of Lake Superior. We're landing in very protected bodies of water. So even the Portage Canal is technically the same water as Lake Superior. So we are landing in it. It's just that they're in very protected areas where even on the windiest days, the waves aren't out of control. So
I have been on the shores of Tobin Harbor. I've kayaked through there before. That can be sometimes a moose crossing. Has that ever been anything to affect your landings there?
I've never had a moose that has prevented me from landing, but there's been a couple of times where, as I've been landing, I've seen a moose crashing along the shoreline in the water. Certainly seen them swimming in Tobin Harbor and other various, also at Wendigo on the other side of the island. So, yeah, when you think of it, I'm in the airplane all day. That's my office. That's where I spend the most time of the day. So it doesn't happen often, but the few times that I do see a moose, it usually is from my seat in the aircraft. And yeah, so it's usually a pretty cool view when I do get to see it.
And probably really fun for your passengers too.
Yeah. Sometimes it's one of those split-second things when you're moving. And you say, "Hey, did you see that?" And everyone's like, "What?" But yeah, the ones that do see it are definitely going to enjoy that.
Let's talk a little bit about your passengers, the average people that you are taking out to Isle Royale. Can you kind of give us an idea of who you're usually transporting? Maybe they're the ones that have chosen to go by seaplane and not by the Ranger or other ways of getting out there by water. Tell us a little bit about that. Maybe are there restrictions to keep in mind? Tell us about who you fly out to the island and back.
Well, I would say we fly all sorts of people. We're flying folks who are going on vacation. That's for, probably the primary thing. Backpacking is one of the primary activities that people are going to be going to do out in Isle Royale, and we do load their backpacks. We do have a 45-pound maximum weight limit for their backpack, but we can accommodate that large overnight backpacking size. There is also, we also fly folks that are going out there just for the day. Those people typically have light luggage, so that's not hard to accommodate. And then there are also folks that are going to the lodge, and those folks will have usually different types of luggage, maybe carry-on suitcases like conventional for airline aircraft, and maybe some duffel bags or small day hiking backpacks. for when they go out hiking, but are going to stay at the lodge in the evening. So we have a broad mix of folks who are doing those different activities and also how they're staying on the island, whether or not they've got their tent with them or if they're going to be staying in a nice warm lodge room. So
if folks are staying at the lodge, are they also limited to 45 pounds?
Yeah, we do have it. Yep, it's a 45 pound maximum for each passenger ticket that is allotted. Yep.
That's got to be tough sometimes, I bet you, people. And does that ever get to be a difficult moment on the dock when you're weighing them and you're weighing their luggage?
Yeah. So we do our best to make sure that it's published in as many different places. I mean, for one, it's on the website as people are doing research of whether or not they want to take a flight to Isle Royale. It's also part of the contract that they have to acknowledge that they've seen that information before they're even allowed to pay for it. And then also in additional information as they're receiving their confirmation letters for planning their trip and keeping those records. But of course, some people slip through the cracks, and when they show up, and our team is there with the scales, and they are not aware of that, it can be a little bit, I think, hectic. It also depends on the timeline. Did they show up late? We ask people to show up about 45 minutes before their scheduled departure time. So, were they running late already? Are they already a little hectic and frazzled? But the easiest part, the first thing we always say is, okay, dump out your water. You don't need to carry water to Isle Royale. You can, first of all, even if you decide to filter your own water out there, it's really, excellent water right there where we land. But also, there's a water treatment plant at Rock Harbor or even Wendigo, and you can just fill up at the tap. So it's not really a big inconvenience to be able to refill your water. And water weighs 8 pounds a gallon. I mean, it's pretty heavy for its density. So that's a quick way. And then after that, it's the tough decisions of what are you gonna, what have you decided is no longer absolutely necessary for your excursion, and sometimes that's a tough decision. The only other leeway is potentially the flight is not full and the captain's able to decide, okay, we're missing, there's only a couple people on this flight. I can take some extra weight and such, but really, in a practical matter, we got to get people down to the weight baggage limit size.
I love that story. And, I'm thinking of myself right now because I'm a skier. And usually when we take a commercial airline and we're at that weight moment and, my husband's saying, here, let me take one of your ski boots. Okay. And somebody's got to carry this or that. And when you're going to Isle Royale, I mean, I've been around before. And it's just hilarious that somebody who's backpacking says, I need to take that curling iron or I need to take that hair dryer. And you're like, let's just take a minute here, because that's one of the things that we really try, especially even with this podcast, to educate people about. You're going to Isle Royale. You might not need, especially if you're backpacking, all of this. Now, do you have your head net?
Right.
That's really I'm not going to let you take that, leave that back. You've got to take that with you. But certainly there's a lot of other things you don't have to carry.
We're talking with Tomás Sowles today here, who is chief pilot with Isle Royale Seaplanes. Now, you mentioned your website. Could you give us that here while we have a quick moment? Because I think if there's people that are listening that are interested in finding out more, it sounds like you do have a wealth of information there. What is the website to find out more?
Yeah, our website's really easy, www.isleroyaleseaplanes.com.
Okay.
You can Google that and find all sorts of information once you've clicked on there. We've got frequently asked questions, reservation tab, and all sorts of information to learn about the flights.
Okay.
How early do I have to make my reservation, Tomas?
Well, that is a kind of a loaded question. I always encourage people to make their reservations as soon as they're able to. And the reason why is because as the date gets closer, and especially July and August, and even into early September, it is very difficult to accommodate someone's specific time, both the date and time requests for both the departure and the not the arrival, but the both ends of the departure. So going to Waara and then also the return flight. And what we find is that folks who are going to be a little less flexible are going to have a really difficult time. But the truth is that if you are flexible, you can book a little less. You can book more last minute. Mm-hmm. But with that said, I mean, when I say flexibility, I mean it could be there might only be one. You might only be able to accommodate one night as opposed to the 3 or 4 that you wanted to go out there for. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, unfortunately, it ends up. I would always say book as soon as you can. We do allow bookings over a year in advance. So
okay. Yeah.
So you can start planning your trip for next year, and we do. We have lots of people who do that. Yeah.
We're talking with Tomás Sowles today, Chief Pilot with the Isle Royale Seaplanes here on our podcast. Tomás, tell us a little bit about the passenger when they're getting ready to go out there and they're perhaps going for their first time. And then let's talk about what they're like when they come back. Tell us about that. You must have some stories.
Well, lots of folks are a little uneasy about climbing into an aircraft so small. To give our listeners a perspective, many of us have flown on small aircraft, but to give you an idea, this aircraft, one of them has seating for 4 adults and the other one has seating for 7 adults. So many of us have not been on an aircraft that small. It only has one engine. It's definitely a different level than most of us have flown on for commercial airline travel. Right. And because of that, folks are uneasy about it. And that's with, great understanding it. So I try to do, every flight I always do my best and, especially to try to make people, at ease. And what often happens is a lot of folks end up finding that they enjoyed it more than a regular commercial flight. And I don't necessarily know why. But I do have a few insights, and I believe probably the first one is that because we were traveling over a body of water, the air is usually very calm, and there's a few reasons for that. But because the flight is usually very calm for 90% of the flight, I think people really enjoy that, and that helps them stay at ease. And avoid any kind of motion sickness. So right off the bat, I think that's probably the biggest. But the other part might be that they're able to see what's going on. They can see the pilot, and such. And so I think that might also be a factor. But I, of course, am the pilot, so I can't relate to what it must feel like to be passenger in one of the seats behind me.
I just have to think that it adds to the sense of the adventure of the journey you're going on, whether it's even just for a day, but you're going out to Isle Royale. And then, as you mentioned, also the vintage aircraft, they're all airworthy and seaworthy and everything, but there's something about that old design and that old feel that it really probably, I'm just comparing this because we've talked with folks with the Ranger 3, and that's about a 6-ish hour. That's a ride on a vessel, a solid vessel, a good vessel, but you're not, you're on the water and you're out there in the middle of the big lake. But this is a completely different thing, about 45 minutes-ish in the air in something like this, and then suddenly you see the island and there it is. There's got to be some sort of just real adventure to it, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. That's, I think, one of the biggest reasons people like to fly with us outside of maybe a time savings. But, you go on the Ranger 3 and you fully appreciate how far away, how remote Isle Royale is, right? And even though the seaplane speeds that up, the fact that you're taking a seaplane to get to this destination really adds to that, and also evokes that same emotion of just how remote this destination is, because seaplanes are synonymous with remote locations.
I love that. And Tomas, I'm getting goose pimples even just thinking, because all the dozens of times that I've been to Isle Royale, I've only flown there once, and it was with you. And you greeted me in a different way about just teaching me about Isle Royale. And even though I had been to Wendigo, I understood where the American was. I knew where the Rock of Ages lighthouse was. To have you kind of guide me there and explain, because we had to make that, the whole length of Isle Royale from Rock of Ages all the way up to Rock Harbor, that passage along that amazing archipelago. It really was wonderful to have you. I mean, you should be a ranger. You're the air ranger for Isle Royale, and really helping to understand the perspective of, as you said, such a remote place. And kayaking it, circumnavigating it by kayak was also a very important piece of learning about that park. But I would suggest if someone has the opportunity to fly to it, is just, you will never forget it.
Yeah, you definitely want to be hands and feet on the ground, exploring the island and experiencing it firsthand. But you're right. I mean, having that bird's eye view gives you another perspective to be able to appreciate, but also relate everything that you've been doing down on the ground. So yeah, it's a great way to enjoy the island as well.
Talking with Tomás Sowles today, who is chief pilot with Isle Royale Seaplanes, on getting out to Isle Royale National Park on Lake Superior. How many flights do you guys, if it's a good day, average day, how many flights, how many runs do you make?
We'll do about 10 round trips to the island. And I think we have a capacity limit of in the high 40s, I believe, for a daily capacity. And so that ends up being about 10 round trips between all of our aircraft. We usually run about 3 aircraft a day.
Oh, okay. All right.
And Tomas, how about from Grand Marais or from Grand Portage? Are there any flights from that direction in Minnesota?
We do. Yep. Our Cessna 206 model is equipped with amphibious floats, and so we'll land at the Grand Marais Airport in Minnesota, which is located about maybe 10 minutes outside of downtown Grand Marais, up on the ridgeline, and we'll fly both to Wendigo and Rock Harbor from Grand Marais. We do 2 flights a day out of there.
I hate to bring it up, but how often do you have to cancel flights?
Well, I don't have an actual statistical number, but we do get affected by the fog. That's our biggest deal. So, the lake's cold, and sometimes the fog comes in, and we've got to wait for it. And it can be difficult because the fog, while it can sometimes be generally forecasted, it's really hard to give very localized fog forecasts. And really, that's all that matters, because we need it to be, fog is going to be.
Yeah, you got to be safe. I mean, it's like if the weather moves in, it's like we've talked with so many people about Lake Superior and everything, that the weather on Lake Superior is the ultimate dictator of what's going to be happening. So if you think you're going to go out and you think you're going on a kayak run, or you think you're going on the Ranger, or you think you're going around wherever, if the weather comes in, that's going to win. And you don't try to beat that, because Lake will win.
Yeah, it's true. No matter what you decide for your transportation, there is always going to be an element of the weather being able to dictate it, let alone any kind of mechanical issues. But I mean, now I would be amiss if I said that that the fog didn't affect us more often. But with that said, what I will say is there are very few, maybe only 2 or 3 days a whole summer where we actually don't fly at all during the whole day because of the bad weather. So typically what happens is you get fog in the morning, and it takes a few hours to burn off. And we have enough aircraft to be able to catch up from what was missed and delayed in the morning, so that people are where they want to be at least by the afternoon and into the early evening. So,
Tomas, who is your weather station, or who is your weather monitor on the island? Do you have somebody up at the Mount Ojibwe Tower, or where do you have your other side? Who's telling you what's happening at Rock Harbor on the island?
So we do not have any. There is no official weather reporting on the island. However, with that said, there are a series of webcams that are on the island at various locations, and our listeners can look at them if they'd like. They're actually on the National Park Service's website. You can Google them, and they're excellent webcams, and they're fun to look at even if you're not a pilot. And we look at them all the time because we have no desire to fly out to an island or, fly all 45 minutes all the way out there just to have to come all the way back. If we know that there's, if the webcam is showing fog and you can't even see the trees in front of the camera, there's no reason to go out there.
Right.
And so we'll wait. And those cameras are really excellent for our decision making.
So what do you do when the tourist season starts to draw to a close? What do you do in terms of maybe for your season coming to a close? What do you do in that time, that transition period?
I forget what our last day of the season is. It might be the 16th of September or 17th. But that will be our typical last day. Sometimes it goes into the 20s, September 20th ish, where we come to a close on Isle Royale and we wrap things up there, and we start focusing on actually getting things closed up in Houghton. However, last year we started the color tours, which is a local event in Houghton and the Keweenaw. So it does not involve Isle Royale, where we fly 30-minute flights through about the 15th of October so that people can enjoy the fall color changes throughout the Keweenaw.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
We think Brockway Mountain is going to take your breath away. I can imagine this tour. Wow.
Yeah, so people really enjoyed it last year, so we're all excited about getting to do that again. And so yeah, we plan to host that again for this fall.
Well, Tomas, it's really been a pleasure chatting with you here on the podcast today. As we wrap up, I'm certainly interested if you have any last thoughts for us. And please, if you would be so kind as to give us your website information again so people can find out maybe about planning to take one of these excursions, maybe even a color tour if they're in the area there. Can you give us maybe a few more thoughts, and then how can they find out more?
Yeah, I think that folks would really enjoy a flight to Isle Royale, and even if they are potentially a little uneasy about flying, I think that, but they still have a little bit of interest. If it piques their interest, then they should consider giving it a try. With that said, our website is www.isleroyaleseaplanes.com. Our color tours, I'm not sure if we have information about that on our website just yet, but it will be as the fall season gets closer.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for the work you do. And again, I really think you're the Isle Royale Ranger for the air, getting folks over there safely and sharing with them just how special that amazing park in our Big Blue really is.
Yeah, thank you, Tomas, today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Frida, Walt, thank you again. Appreciate it. Take care, guys.
It's Tomás Sowles, who is chief pilot with Isle Royale Seaplanes. And, it's interesting for me, Frida, as someone that grew up in the Copper Country, grew up outside of Houghton in Chassel, where this is all based out of, the operations are out of Houghton. The Keweenaw Waterway and the Lift Bridge and the Ranger and Seaplanes and Isle Royale, that's all been part of it in terms of the culture growing up there. But this was insight I never even had, even growing up there and being a part of that area.
Well, I love how Tomas shared with us that seaplanes were really the beginning because we didn't have runways. Mm-hmm. And I think when you land on water, particularly there at Tobin Harbor, when I landed at the canal, it didn't seem to be the same, but like at Tobin Harbor, and as soon as you just kind of, fall into where you are at, and, the moose are there. They come down right there at the harbor, and thank goodness they weren't swimming.
And as we were talking with Tomas, I feel like it does add to the adventure quality of it. Not that the Ranger doesn't give you that, because that is a magnificent vessel to go out on the big lake. And if you want to have that opportunity to just go out on the deck and look out and see nothing but the big lake, the Ranger 3 is exceptionally good for that to get to Isle Royale. But to get into one of these airplanes, especially I'm really interested in the vintage aircraft from the 50s that still runs, and they wouldn't be using it if it wasn't safe. But it's just really interesting just to have that thing of, maybe it's 45 minutes in the air, but there's nothing like that. That's got to be the smell of the aircraft, the sound of the engine, the water, and then breaking free of the water. And then you're up in the air, and then you're up there just about long enough to get used to it. And then you start the approach and you land, and you've done it. I've never done it. So it must really be something.
You got to do it, Walt. You got to do it. We got to go. We just got to go, boy.
All right. Well, we can do that.
Well, we hope we've encouraged you to make a trip to Isle Royale. And as Tomas said, you've got to book those reservations in advance. It's a tight schedule, but the color tours could be fantastic.
Yeah, if you're visiting in that region, and certainly look into it. Any of that, the Keweenaw National Historical Park, Isle Royale, any of that, anything from Pictured Rocks on over to that part of Lake Superior, it is certainly worth checking out. And you can find out more through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation website and other sources, including the National Park Service. But that's going to do it for us this time around on the podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees, independently owned and operated since 1993. Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.